Well, thank you, Kiera, for telling the story, and thank you, Diane, for supporting it. So you got your start being doing skate videos, and how did that experience prepare you for this film?
I mean, certainly it gave me a treasure trove of things to pull from to extend the sense of time in our lives. I mean, I'm very self-taught. I didn't go to film school, so it's like where I sort of started learning how to create media. I mean, I think skate videos are their own genres, and I think one unique aspect to them outside of technical qualities and everything is something that's really valued in skate videos is creativity and originality. And skate videos are always trying to like push the boundaries with doing new things. So it made me value that.
And this began as I think you called it an experimental skate video. What did that mean?
I mean, basically, I wanted to make a film that delved into skateboarders' relationships with their fathers. That was 6 years ago, and I went around the country and interviewed skateboarders all over. And then I went to Cordon Films with this survey film. And Keira and Zack weren't in the film at this point, and they introduced me to films like Hoop Dreams that were verite films, and so that's when I started following Zack and Kiera longitudinally, and then over time I entered the film myself.
You had been shooting them practically like your entire, like as soon as you knew how to pick up a camera, like they were your stars. Like was that familiarity helpful when you were starting to get closer to them emotionally?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the emotionality was like pretty transparent, like especially with Kiera, like right away, especially with Kiera. I mean, that interview where we commiserated about crying after getting beaten. I mean, that was our first or second interview together.
But you shot him for many years, though. That footage that.
Yeah, I mean, for Kiera, a lot of that footage I pulled from people that shot him. I mean, the one clip that I shot of Kiera was the fight sequence, and I didn't even know who he was. I was like, oh, there's a fight going at the skate park. I'm gonna go like, and then it wasn't until the last summer when I started like digging through the archival, and then I saw this clip, and I was like, oh my God, that's Kiera,
Yeah. Early on, Zack says something like, I've given you free reign. So did you actually have to come up with some sort of guidelines with them? And did that suddenly change your relationship with him?
No, I mean, there'd be several points where I'd ask him things that moment was very much playful, and we put it up near the front because it was near the, it was like setting up the male antics like before we turned the film. But I mean, I would ask him on camera, moments that weren't in the film, like, how do you feel about being in this documentary? And this is after the fact, after, a lot of things had happened. And he was like, what you see is what you get. And I'm just, I'm supportive of the film. So he was pretty much on board.
Yeah. And then for Kiera, like, at what point did you realize kind of what this project was exactly?
About 5 years in the film, and Bing was just like, I can't really go too far into it right now, but this might actually be a thing, and I was just like, word.
One of the most beautiful moments in the film for me is when he confesses to you that one of the reasons he's so into your stories because he sees elements of himself in you, and all you could say is, wow. I
honestly, I feel like I had that reaction just because I never knew that, and I didn't know what to say. I was just like, wow.
So how's your reaction now, like now that the film is out and you've seen it several times, to kind of him kind of speaking through you but with you at the same time?
It's definitely easier. I would say it's definitely something I feel like we could just like talk about regardless of like where we are. Like it's just something that I feel like at the time it was just like I was just shocked. I like never knew any of that. But yeah, I feel like over time our friendship has definitely like grown because of it.
How did you guys hide it from each other your entire like growing up with around other people who may be going through similar things? And did you just pretend it didn't exist?
At least like for me, no one ever was just like no one ever has questioned me about it, I guess. So it wasn't really more hiding. It just never got brought up.
Bing, was that your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is typical of like all children that go through this. I mean, it starts in the home. I mean, one of the most lasting sort of effects of abuse is not the physical scars, but the emotional lessons of, if you talk about it, you're a crybaby, like why talk about it, like, and I think, that gets learned early on, and then it gets reinforced by your friends who sort of go through the same thing. And so of course we wouldn't talk about it. And I mean, with what Kiera was saying, there's no sort of catalyst to like bring that conversation up. So, and there was no example for how to have that conversation. So it was uncharted territory.
Yeah. And then Diane, as this conversation was happening, I mean, you have a lot of experience on documentary. You've worked with Steve James, at Diane Quon Films. You probably are aware of some of the emotional difficulties for the filmmakers and the subjects. What kind of advice were you imparting from the sidelines?
I think probably when we were about to launch the film and at Sundance and in such a big public space, one of the things we talked about a lot, Bang and I and the folks at Cordon, was how do we prepare everyone that's going to be there, including Kiera, and Zack was there, Bing's mom was there, how to make sure that they're prepared to meet an audience and see this in front of people. And I think that helped that we met with them, showed them the film, and also discussed what they could expect. Because, I mean, it was hard for us, because can you imagine having your life up on the screen there?
Yeah. And in terms of the vulnerability, I mean, exactly halfway through is when you have the conversation with your mom, you guys sit down. And it seemed, like up to that point, we didn't, at least when I was watching, I didn't realize this is where that was going. Can you talk about the process of writing yourself into this story?
So, I mean, I didn't really intend to be in the film, but a couple of years ago, we did a rough cut. We must have done like 20 or 25 rough cut screenings and feedback screenings over the course of the film. But a couple of years ago, we did one in New York, and I'd left some of these moments in there, like with me and Kiera having conversations, or like me interacting with people. And so afterwards, people were like, how'd you find this story? I was like, well, I grew up in Rockford, and I skated with these guys, and I also went through similar issues. And I have like footage of them when they were younger. And the person was like, have you considered being in the film? And so at that point I was like, well, how many other people feel that way? And everyone raised their hands. So I was like, okay, let's do this. But I mean, so it wasn't that I was scared of being vulnerable. It was more like the storytelling problem of, I felt like I'd seen a lot of personal docs that, and I didn't really want to make a personal doc. But I saw this film called Sherman's March that was this, that used this device as this one-man band camera person, and he sort of became a character by just interacting with people from behind the camera. And so I knew I had a lot of those moments already, so we sort of started with that. And then we tried voiceover for a second. It didn't really quite sit right with me and my editor, and it eventually, I mean, by the time I started working with my editor, I had already interviewed my brother and my mom and the skate shop owner, so those are sort of points of building. I mean, it was difficult. I mean, I had cut my mom's interview just a lot of different ways, and it wasn't really quite working. Then when I started working with my co-editor, the scene you see in the film with me and my mom is basically first try for him. So it was more about, I realized like what he did was, it was more about what wasn't being said rather than what was being said.
And there's some great moments with you in the film, great in terms of for us to watch, but like times when it seems like you have a chance to intervene or to start a conversation with people who maybe, especially with Nina and Zack. Could you talk about like staying quote unquote objective versus wanting to kind of be their friend in those moments?
I mean, once I realized that Zack was, possibly abusive, and I had to go on this sort of search for what happened and, what that meant. It helped that I can't remember the timeline, but I think it ultimately helped that I was a character in the film and that I could interact, because I think we have two sort of opposing values in our society. We want to end violence in the home, but we also have this fierce protection of privacy and keeping family business behind closed doors. And so the only way I felt like I could do that in a film where I was exposing people's lives was to show the audience the process that I had to sort of tiptoe around to make sure I was being sensitive to both sides, but at the same time knowing that I had my own moral compass and I couldn't put friendship beyond that moral compass.
I'm sure there's some questions for the audience. Anyone have any questions for the filmmakers?
How difficult was it, or how did you get your mom to appear in the film, or was she willing to do it right off the bat? Or?
Yeah, I just called her up and I was like, can I interview you for my film? And we picked a date, and she was like, yeah.
But it sounded like she realized how important it was for you to get to heal, is what she says.
Yeah, I mean that's where the film went. I don't know. We didn't really have that close of. We didn't see each other a lot growing up. She was always working. So yeah, I didn't really expect any. I didn't know where it was gonna go.
Yeah. What are your plans for your future? I guess we can ask for all three of you.
I have a couple of films in development, so I'm gonna keep making films.
Well, I'm moving to hot Arizona. Around like September or August. And my plans, I guess, are just, I don't know, I'm just going to try to travel a lot more and just keep skating and try not to get hurt, I guess. That's really it. Maybe do some really bad music on the side, I don't know.
Yeah, one thing you don't see Kiera, and which was in part of the rough cuts, is that he is a talented musician. So we'll have to do a. You're welcome. And we're still doing a lot of work on Bing's film to bring it out more widely. And then I'm working on producing two other films at Cordon.
And Diane's also a director. We've shown her work in the past.
Yeah, I'm grateful to Brian for showing that.
Other questions? Yeah, right there. When you were young, would you have influences from pro skaters?
I mean, Tony Hawk was the reason why I started skate. No, I mean, really, it was the video game. Like,
Oh.
I played the video game and I asked for a skateboard for Christmas.
I would agree with that. Also, just like a lot of black skateboarders, because that it wasn't really something I could just like do and not get made fun of or like threatened because I was a skateboarder. Like whenever I tried to, at least when I first got into it, like my family was like, "Oh, that's like white people stuff. Like black people don't skateboard." And I was like, "There's Kareem Campbell, there's Javante Turner, there's Stevie Williams, there's like Ray Barbary. There's like so many people that like it was just funny because after they said that, I just did a quick YouTube search and just, haha, like, but yeah, definitely Tony for sure though.
And similarly for Bing, like, were you aware of yourself as an Asian American skateboarder growing up? I mean, that doesn't get talked about in the film, but I'm curious what you think
Yeah,
about
I mean, I certainly. The reality is you can only fit so much in a 90-minute film, and I felt like I really did see myself in Kiere's story all the way to him having to navigate two different spaces. Having this mostly white friend group, but also having to deal with what it means to be Asian American. But we were talking about this earlier, but I looked up to a skateboarder named Jerry Su because he was this amazingly talented Chinese American skateboarder. There wasn't a lot of that when I was growing up, and just seeing representation in the skateboarding community was, it made me like feel even better about skateboarding.
Now we've got the two of you, so thank you. Right here. What advice would you give teenagers who are going through a similar situation?
Well, so the reason why we picked that end credit song, it's the band called the Mountain Goats. It's a song called This Year. It's from an album called The Sunset Tree. It came out in 2007. The whole album is about him sort of dealing with his abusive stepfather growing up in Southern California. And on the inside album cover sleeve, it says, this album is for every child that lives through an abusive childhood. And this is to let you know that you're going to not only live, but live to tell your tale. And that really influenced me a lot. Just seeing that someone is passionate enough to like put his story out there and have survived it. I mean, I don't know. I think it means a lot just to know that there's other people out there. So I guess my advice would just be to try to connect and like find in some way a way to feel that you're not alone, whether that's talking to someone or finding a way to express what you're going through.
Kiera, do you have anything to add?
Honestly, I guess I would just say to just if you have access to some type of like support system, whether it like being said if it's your friends or something, like I feel like just accessing that as much as you can help you, because it definitely helped me. If I didn't have a friend group to like kind of run away from home to, like I don't know if I'd be here right now, honestly. Do you have any advice?
I would just say that this is why the film means so much to me. It's been amazing after we show the film how many young people come up to us and start sharing their story, and that's what we hope happens, that people, especially young people, feel that they have they're able to share their stories with, whether it's a friend or an adult or a resource that we're trying to provide on our website, just to know that there's people who are willing to listen to them.
Let's go right here.
So the question is whether whether my interview with my mom helped me move on. The reality is, I think in making the film, my headspace is just in like, I have to do this and this and this, and the Q&A and discussions like this and panels and press afterwards, now that the film is released, has been the space where I've been able to sort of grapple with what the film means. I started seeing a therapist a couple years ago. I think if I wouldn't have done the film, I probably wouldn't have been driven into a point where I sought that out. I think that's where a lot of the work has come from. But I think in reality, I feel like these things don't go away. I'm never going to fully heal from them. I think it's more about understanding how it affects me and being able to, I guess, live a life that, I can grapple with and have a sense of control over.
What's the process like of going through all of your old footage?
So, I must have made like hundreds of rough cuts. I was editing while I was shooting. I mean, this film, I was working as a camera assistant for many years, and this was a side project for a long time. And then, it really was just a series of rough cuts with a lot of feedback and a lot of getting outside my perspective from showing it to people. I feel like certain friends were getting sick of me having them watch it so much. But that was important. And then, I met Josh, my co-editor, last summer. We were working on a different project, and we really clicked. And so I sort of swindled him into coming on. And the first thing he had me do was, he had me cut Kiera's story on its own to make sure it was sort of standing on its own legs, and then Zack's story on his own to stand on its own legs. And then we gave a shot at, he had me try my story too, but it wasn't really quite working, so we decided to go back to it at a later time. So we wove Zack, and we spent a couple months just like weaving Zack and Kiera's stories together, and then, we put my story in last. And then it wasn't until the last few months when I dug through the archival and really expanded that sense of time.
So how was it like to maintain your relationship with Zack as you kind of got to know more about him?
I honestly believe that one issue with domestic violence and violence in the home is that we demonize and call abusers monsters. I think that doesn't help move the issue forward. I think we absolutely have to hold actions accountable, and I will forever hold Zack's actions accountable, whatever he did. But at the same time, I don't think just calling him a bad guy is going to help the problem. At the end of the day, I think, I know where I stand morally, and that's, I don't think abuse is right. But I also think that there's something to him that's complex, and there's something in him that says a lot about why this issue has been happening for a long time and why this issue gets handed down. And, I think my process of filming with him was that, just seeing him as a human being in all sorts of facets. He certainly never expressed any sort of fear of what we were filming would result in. I would check in again. I would check in with him every once in a while. I'd say like even after he had ran away from Denver and he'd abandoned his apartment, I was like, "How do you feel about me, filming all this stuff?" And he would say again, "Whatever you captured is what you captured. I'll be there to support you afterwards." So,
in the back. What kind of advice do you have for artists who are dealing with trauma?
Absolutely therapy, or just self-care, I should say. Self-care is a more broad statement, but I think therapy for me, absolutely was necessary to make this film. But I saw this panel a couple years ago. It was one of my favorite panels I've ever seen. The panel was called Emotional Sustainability in Documentary Filmmaking. And but it was just 4 seasoned documentarians talking about how they emotionally support and get support and give each other support while they do their work, and that's super important. And it was simple things like just being able to email a friend who you knew had a work in progress and saying if you honestly believe it, saying I really like the project you're doing right now, it's really important. yeah, things like that. So.
Right here. Were you ever second guessing showing it to others, or were you ready?
Well, we showed all the participants in the film before we picture locked. That's something we believe is the ethical thing to do at Cordon. The more your participants give them, the more that your participants are giving to the film, the more of an obligation you have to show them. So we did that. I think that ultimately was what helped me feel better about putting the film out there, because it had their blessing. They were all, in agreement that the film was an honest portrayal of everything that happened. But yeah, certainly before that point, I was nervous, more so about like whether or not they had problems with the film and what those sort of conversations would look like. But we never really got to those conversations because they liked the film.
How do you decide that your story is worth telling?
That's hard. I mean, it's like, yeah, I feel like everybody has at least one or two really good films in them if you're willing to sort of go from a place of personal experience. And I'm not talking about a personal film necessarily, but I think we all have very unique experiences growing up and being from where we're from and being from the communities that we're from. And I think we should honor that. And I don't think enough filmmakers really do that. They often sort of seek stories outside of what they know and where they come from. But in terms of a story worth telling, I think only you can decide that. But at the same time, you have to sort of be cognizant that there is, I guess, a quote unquote market out there that's, going to have whatever validating force that they're going to have based on what's hot right now, or like what are the social issues that are quote unquote fundable right now. But, in terms of finishing the project, like I think you have to pick something that, despite failing, those markers of what the market dictates, like you're still going to push through and care more about the project than, any sort of validation. So.
Dan, do you want to add anything to that as somebody who kind of sees a lot of filmmakers
Yeah.
through that process?
I agree with Bing that if you have a story that you're passionate about, you should definitely do it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be seen by tons of people. You just have to be realistic about what your goals are. When I did that little film that showed here a couple years ago, my goal was that I just thought, if I can get it in one festival, and that was all I hoped for, and yet it was so important for me to tell the story, and I was happy with just having one festival, and it ended up being many more. So I would encourage any filmmaker who's passionate, as Bing said, because it takes a lot of time and work and energy. So if you're willing to put that in, you should make it, and it'll find its audience.
I have time for one more question. Right in the middle. How's the film affected your personal life since it's been released?
At least with me, I've gotten over my fear of flying. And I flew Southwest today, so that was kind of scary.
Shout out to our sponsor, Southwest Airlines.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. But I sat in a window seat, but it was between two windows. It was like one of those things where, yeah, I felt safe. Anyways, but okay. I guess it's like, I don't know. I've kind of gotten a little bit better at talking to people. Usually I'm like really shy, but this is kind of, I guess, like the way it's affected my personal life. It's just like I've just been like able to talk to people a little easier, I guess. I don't know.
Bing?
My whole life is taken over by this now. I don't know. I feel like I don't have a personal life anymore.
Yeah, I feel the same. And I have to say, personally, I've seen both Bing and Kiera grow so much, and it's been great to see that.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm sure if there are more questions, if you're a member of Pack Arts, we have a reception for you, and then we can all hang out for a little bit. But once again, let's thank Bing, Kiera, and Diane for being here.